I have a quick question. How long would it take you to fully grieve your mother, your dad, or your sibling, or your best friend, or your uncle? How much time do you think it would take to grieve them? Think about it. I highly doubt that you said 3 to 5 business days, and yet you would be lucky to have 3 to 5 business days in order to grieve. That would be considered generous. Bereavement leave is one of those things that you don't really think about until you need it or until someone you know needs it. When my friend Mo became a hairstylist in her very early 20s, she knew that it meant self-employment, but she wasn't thinking that someday she would be a young widowed mother who was shampooing hair and cutting hair and listening to other people's problems 2 weeks, maybe, after her husband died by suicide, when the shock of the loss had not even begun to wear off. I remember going back to my cubicle and finding a mug, a dirty mug. The mug had that crust of coffee that's in the bottom when coffee just sits and sits and sits. And I remember taking that mug to our corporate office and rinsing it out and thinking, wow, I poured that coffee when I still had a dad. And then I remember going to meetings and working on presentations and talking about quarterly goals and thinking, everyone in this room is still living in the world and I am just floating outside of it. I remember how my throat hurt all the time because I was always trying not to cry when I remembered that my dad was dead. And sometimes I would forget. For just brief moments, I would forget. And then I'd be in a meeting and be like, oh God, my dad's dead. God. I didn't go back to work because I was ready. I didn't go back because I was done grieving. I went back because I had to go back. I had taken the time allotted to me and I couldn't afford to take any PTO because, and this is kind of an unusual circumstance, I think, but my husband was also dying. He had brain cancer. I didn't know when I would need more time, so I didn't take any other. Grief is something that everyone who has the misfortune of being a human being and loving another human being or animal or anything else that is temporary in this world will one day experience. But grieving, the process of processing your loss, tending to your grief, tending to your emotions, your well-being, that is still a privilege, and it shouldn't be. Grief is a physical and emotional process. It has physical and psychological symptoms: exhaustion and sleeplessness and irritability and depression and loss of appetite and voracious appetite and heart palpitations and stomach problems, all of which are at odds with what our culture expects from us at work, which is productivity, perfection, and performance. And even if your culture has traditions for grieving, if you sit Shiva for 7 days, for example, that is likely not going to be paid time off from your employer. So all this to say that bereavement leave in the US is generally very bad. And actually, according to the US Department of Labor, bereavement leave isn't really a thing. It's referred to as funeral leave, and there's no law that says that an employer has to give it to you and pay you for that time. The Fair Labor Standards Act doesn't require that time off for funerals should be paid. Basically, the government says, let's hope that your employer isn't a cold-hearted lizard person, and we'll take it from there. Good luck with the funeral, and make sure you're back in your cubicle and ready to pound out some PowerPoints on Monday, okay? I was. And also, good luck finding affordable therapy to help you process these emotions, because we don't care about that either. Also, good luck with the bills, because we don't care about that either. LOL. Sob is really the emoji I'm looking for. Just sob, sob, sob. Only 1 in 5 companies offer more than 5 days of bereavement leave. And you probably already know that many jobs don't come with any benefits now. Your Lyft driver doesn't have paid bereavement leave, I'm guessing. Your Target delivery person doesn't have bereavement leave or maternity leave. Your hairstylist doesn't have any kind of paid leave. You might not actually have any paid bereavement leave, in which case my advice to you is to explore every option that you can afford on your own for insurance. I'm talking about doing it now, short-term disability, long-term disability. Did you know you're going to need short-term disability when you have a baby, if you decide to have a baby? All of that. Hospitalization insurance, I'm getting the words wrong, but literally look at every option that you can get yourself and do that because things happen. But that's an aside. We don't need to get into that right now. Life insurance, do not forget life insurance. And I bring those up not because money fixes everything, but it does, help a lot of things. And it is easier to take time off of work and even have it be unpaid time off for work when you are not desperate for money. But who in this economy is not desperate for money? The point is that bereavement leave in the US is garbage, which we kind of expect because our attitudes towards grief are pretty garbage. We are a culture that likes you to be okay and stay okay and be okay quickly and just beat your grief to death with gratitude if possible. So oftentimes, if you do have bereavement leave from your employer is going to decide what you get for bereavement leave according to who died. Is it a close family member? Is it a spouse, a child? If it is a friend, an uncle, those days might change or they might not exist. That's what happened with this listener. I'm going to read you this email. This is a true story. She wrote, "My beloved Uncle Michael lived with my family for most of his life and all of mine until he died suddenly in 2009. Michael had Down syndrome, and he truly was the light of all our lives. Because of the nature of his disability, we had a unique relationship. When I was a young child, he was like an older brother and protector, playing with me and caring for me like another parent. But as I got older and was able to do things that he wasn't able to do, for example, driving, our roles reversed somewhat, and I began to help caring for him. He would come to stay at my apartment, delighting in our newfound independence. Needless to say, he was an integral part of my life, and his death was a complete shock, throwing us into the depths of grief. The first day after he died, I called into work to let them know I would be out, likely for at least a few days. I worked with children with disabilities and knew that it would be a struggle to go back to my usual work routine, as Michael would undoubtedly be on my mind constantly. I called the HR department at my work to let them know that I'd had a death in the family and would be using my 3-day bereavement leave. After offering condolences, the HR rep asked me who died. I replied that it was my uncle, who was like a brother to me, and I was immediately told that I did not qualify for bereavement leave because it was only for immediate family, and my uncle did not fall into that category. It was so disappointing to feel that my employer cared so little for me as a person and couldn't expand their category to include someone who was such an important part of my life. And yeah, that is disappointing. It's incredibly disappointing, to say the least, that we are in a position in the US where our employers are deciding who is important to us and what they are worth to us. There are people who will say that it simply just costs too much. You can't have people out at funerals willy-nilly, okay? You gotta have a line, you gotta know. People are gonna be making up funerals left and right. And you know what? I did have a few friends in college whose grandpas continually died right before finals every year. And these were not people from big blended families. These were people from conservative Catholic families who had 14, 15 grandparents over the course of college. And, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen, but I'm going to say that mostly, adults don't lie about going to funerals. And another thing, absenteeism is one thing, but have you heard of presenteeism? That is where workers are at work, but not fully there. Maybe because they are sick, maybe because they are grieving. That was me back at work after my dad's funeral. Presenteeism costs companies untold millions a year because, and this is not shocking, people don't typically do their best work when they're not feeling great, physically or emotionally. And there are many reasons for people to not feel great. If you love someone who is sick, if you love someone who is dying, your grief starts long before that person dies. You are experiencing a series of losses and stressors that pile up on top of all of your other stressors. Work is your source of income, and for many of us, a source of meaning or even an escape sometimes from our personal lives. But there are times when you cannot leave your life at the door, like this listener. She wrote, in 2016, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and we knew time was limited. At the time, I was working in an extremely toxic workplace where we received a whopping 2 weeks of sick and vacation combined. Love that. I also worked with children who are literal germ magnets and sick all the time, and we could take half or full days, not hourly. Probably illegal, but anyways. I started to attend my dad's chemo appointments and very quickly used all of my time. They also asked me to prove it each time I went to his chemo appointments and asked for doctor's paperwork, which I didn't give them because what? About a year later, he passed and I was informed I could have 3 days paid to mourn him before I would have to take the rest of the time unpaid. HR then asked me to send in his obituary so they would know I wasn't lying and could use the 3 days without having to use my sick/vacation, which I had none of. The thing is, that story is not surprising, and I ended up getting dozens and dozens of stories that are just like it. And what really gets me is just the absolute inhumanity of all of this, especially because in the US, we do let corporations be people. We let them shirk their taxes. We let them pay out their CEOs an insane amount of money, even if they are failing their shareholders, failing their employees, failing like the economy at large. And we let them treat the people who make their companies successful like absolute garbage. Every one of these scenarios that we have heard of today has been a nightmare, and every one of them is a nightmare that somebody lived through and that thousands of other people are living through at this exact moment. When we were working on this video and on the longer episode that you can hear on our Patreon, we came across resource conservation theory, which I'm going to explain loosely and inadequately. Basically, you are motivated to conserve, acquire, and protect the resources that you value. So these could be physical resources, these could be emotional resources, these could be relational resources. The loss of these resources can be more impactful than gaining them. So imagine grief as the loss of so many resources, of the person that you loved, of your safety, your sense of self, maybe your job, and maybe your place in the world. And when you are in that space of having already lost resources, it's incredibly stressful, obviously. So the next listener story that I'm going to share with you, I think just encapsulates this resource conservation theory perfectly. So this person wrote in, the company I was at had a fiscal year that went from July to July. We were 2 weeks out from the reset of the PTO. I had a few hours remaining, which made me feel like this was my fault. I found out on Saturday that my dad likely wouldn't make it, and I still decided to go to work Monday. I needed money. Everyone needs money, okay? And I didn't know what to do. So I went to work and I ended up having a breakdown at work and I left midday. My dad passed 3 days later. So I was off work from midday Monday through the rest of the week. I had no idea what the company's bereavement policy was. It hadn't even crossed my mind. My boss calls me midday Wednesday to tell me that it's 3 days paid and to let her know when I would be back. I spend all day Wednesday and Thursday morning at the hospital. Friday, she calls to tell me in this weirdly excited voice that she was able to pay me for the whole week, but needed to know ASAP when I thought I would be coming back to work so she could schedule everyone around my absence. I told her I wasn't sure, but I would update her, and grief is weird. So my memory is really bad for the whole month after, but I believe I ended up going back to work a week after my dad passed. My boss texted me every day until I was able to give her an exact return date, which I believe was exactly 1 week after my dad died. I was 24. This listener, who is 24, does not have the mental resources to keep investing into this job and cannot afford to lose more resources like her job, so she goes back to work before she is ready. And this is normal. You need to keep investing resources, like going to work, to protect what you have left, but you might not have the resources to go back to work to protect the resource that is your work. Are you following this? I am, and I'm not, okay? The study that I read, which I will link to in the description, describes this as a negative spiral, which is the only kind that I've ever experienced, where a grieving person is already spent. They are tender, they are on edge, they are having a hard time concentrating, relating to people. So no, they might not be doing a great job at work. All right, they might not be ready, and still they go, and maybe their performance suffers, maybe other people's performance suffers, maybe everybody suffers. Life is suffering, but life is beautiful too. And these researchers included that it is possible to have a positive spiral for people to help you conserve the resources that you have and to meet you with compassion. And thankfully, we have a story like that to share with you. And when I share this story, what I'm trying to encourage, my best work comes from a place of passive aggression. My best work is created with the intent that people share something and they're like, this is really interesting. Wow, I better go put this on LinkedIn where my employer could see these bereavement leave stories, and maybe they'll start watching at this exact timestamp to hear what happens when you treat people well when they're experiencing grief, okay? So that's kind of what I want you to do with this. I want you to take this and be like, post it and be like, wow, start listening at whatever timestamp this is right now, because what I'm gonna tell you is amazing, okay? This is a great story. All right. And she knows it because she wrote, I want to share my good bereavement leave story because it seems so rare. She already knows. She already knows this is not the norm. My dad died of glioblastoma in 2021. I had started a new job 4 months before he died, and my boss vaguely knew that my dad was sick. I live about 2,000 miles away from my parents, so I wasn't involved in the daily caregiving. My father was a commercial fisherman, and when he was told his death was imminent, he went to work on a boat in the middle of the ocean and didn't tell anyone about his medical condition. So my mom called me saying that she got a call from a boat crew member concerned about my dad's behavior, and I decided I needed to fly home. I gave a full explanation to my boss about what was happening, and her response was, go home for as long as you need. Don't worry about work. We'll figure it out. I received my full pay the whole time and was able to be fully present, helping my mom figure out how we were going to get dad off a boat in the middle of the ocean and into hospice care. I didn't have to think about work while I was navigating how to help my dad as his brain was melting and he was rapidly becoming not himself. He died shortly after this episode, and I was able to take off 4 weeks total, fully paid, all because I had an amazing boss and worked for a company that trusted their employees to do what they needed to do. I know how unfortunately rare this scenario is, and I am forever grateful. I think the only way I'll ever leave this job is if the company somehow no longer exists. Do you hear that, employer? She will never leave this job because of how she was treated like a person when she was grieving her father. There are many studies that have shown that emotional support from work can help with emotional exhaustion, that experiencing compassion and sensitivity from leaders can give people a sense of worth. No doubt, it is worth it to treat a person with care. It is worth it to treat people with compassion. But if you are an employer or a manager, what are you supposed to do? Send a card, send a hot dish? Yes. If you are Midwestern, you gotta send that hot dish and you know it, okay? Besides the hot dish, besides the card, besides, giving people the leave that they need in order to take care of themselves, I am going to link to this other study that I read called the CARE model of employee bereavement support. CARE is an acronym because you know that I live for an acronym. And the study suggests that 4 key themes of effective bereavement support in the workplace are C, communication, A, accommodation, R, recognition of the loss, E, emotional support, care. Communication is not just between the griever and their boss or their HR person, but between the colleagues, the customers, the clients, who is disseminating this information, how. Looking back, I feel very lucky to have had a boss, Rebecca Luna, where are you? I still love you, who told everyone at my office when Aaron was diagnosed with brain cancer that work was a compartment of mine, and that I would bring it up to them if I wanted to talk about it, but otherwise to just proceed as though my husband were just a normal person with nothing in his brain, just the normal contents of a brain. I wanted to compartmentalize. I didn't want to talk about it at all. That's a C. That's communication. Accommodation is what basically nobody who wrote in got except that one girl at the end, okay? It is the acknowledgement of the toll that grief takes on you. It is flexible deadlines. It is working from home. It is paid leave. People in the study who were not given accommodations obviously felt additional stress and distress, and I would imagine some resentment. The R, that recognition of the loss, is something that a lot of people are afraid of. Should you send that card? Should you say something? The people in the study appreciated the loss being acknowledged. But obviously, context is everything. Maybe don't call it out at an all hands meeting and be like, Jen, I heard your dad just died. We're sorry about that. Why don't you come up here and tell us about it? What were his last moments like? Any unresolved issues between the two of you? Anything from your childhood you didn't get resolved on that deathbed? Come on. We all care. Like, don't do that, I would say, unless the person is like, my dad just died and I want everyone at the all hands to know it and talk about it. Back to care. We're at E, which is emotional support. And emotional support is not giving advice. It's not saying that everything happens for a reason or you're so strong. The emotional support that participants described was empathy. Participant number 2 expressed gratitude for the colleagues who gave her Easter chocolate on her first big holiday without both of her parents. Another person said, a coworker I've known for years asked if I would like to go to lunch and we can talk about it or not talk about it. I got that option. We can talk about it or not talk about it. One thing that was mentioned by a participant that I also always suggest to people is putting the date of somebody's loss in your phone and sending a text or a card, maybe both, around that date. It is such a simple way of showing somebody that you give a rip, that you care. The issue of bereavement leave, it does not exist in a vacuum. This is connected to everything when you really think about it. This is connected with our national obsession with productivity and perfection and pulling yourself up by the bootstraps. This is the relentless push for more and more and more that we just endure living in capitalism. This is the focus on doing and not just existing, and we really do need time to exist, to process what has happened to us, to feel our feelings, to fill out the paperwork associated with death. Do you know how much paperwork comes with dying? I found something called the Cost of Dying report by Empathy. It said that the average person took 15 months to complete all of the admin associated with a death. 18 months if they were the executor. 15 months. It's been almost 10 years since my husband died, and I just found a random 401k that he had at a random employer. It has almost $90 in. I haven't rolled it over. I'll do that in another 10 years. It took me 10 years to discover it. I'll roll that over in 10 years, okay? If you do nothing else after watching this, I want you to check your employee benefits and see how much time you have for bereavement leave. And then I want you to review every benefit available to you at work and sign up for them. And then I want you to look into every single income protection insurance that you could possibly afford and sign up for it. Money does not fix a broken heart, but it can buy you the time it takes to fill in some of the cracks. I'm also going to link to a few other things. One is the Option B website. It has information about advocating for bereavement leave at your company, including scripts for your HR and for your manager. We also mentioned income protection benefits. I am not an expert at that, but we do work with a company called The Hartford. They have so many articles about this. The Hartford is a leading group benefits provider, helping to simplify employee benefits by making them more personal and easier to understand, because using those employee benefits, it shouldn't be complicated. So I'm going to link to some articles by them as well. They are not the sponsor of this video, but they are a company that we work with that I really appreciate. And I appreciate them on a professional level and a personal level. They're some of the best people that I've ever worked with, and I think that really matters. There is obviously so much more to say about this. So if you have anything to add, anything, you can call us at 612-568-4441. You can email us, terrible@feelingsand.co. I'm Nora McInerny. Bereavement leave is definitely terrible. Thank you for asking.